to On My Way to Wealth, the podcast where busy Gen Xers can learn financial tips as they navigate life on their way to wealth. And now, please join your host, Luis Rosa.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of On My Way to Wealth. My name is Luis Rosa, and I'm your host. This is episode 52. Tax season is upon us. I'm going to continue with my tax theme for the next couple of episodes, perhaps. Today, I want to talk to you about filling out the W4 form that is provided by the IRS. This is a form, it's called the Withholding Certificate, W4, that the IRS has available to you for you to let your employer know how much taxes you want withheld from your paycheck. You want to make sure that you take a look at this at least once a year or whenever you have a major life change, such as marriage, kids, a new job, or a second job. Because sometimes you might have different types of income during the year, and you don't want to run the chance of not having enough taxes withheld throughout the year, because then you might owe at the end. So that's a planning opportunity to be able to fill this form out and make sure you have the proper amount of tax withholding. Also, some people prefer not to have too much taxes withheld, because then that could end up in a very large refund. And I know some people that would rather not have a large refund, because the way they look at it is getting a refund sometimes just means that you overpaid your taxes throughout the year. Excluding any credit, et cetera. So if that's the case, and all that means is that then you gave the government an interest-free loan throughout the year, right? So some people look at it that way and say, I'd rather just get my money throughout my paycheck. So one of the ways that you can adjust how much is withheld from your paycheck is via submitting this W4 form to your employer. So the IRS just came out with a brand new form that to some extent is easier to fill out, and it could get a little bit more complicated depending on your situation. So if you're a single individual with no dependents and one job, it's very easy to fill out this form. It gets just a little bit more cumbersome if you have dependents and maybe a spouse that works, or you have other income and you want to make sure they have enough taxes withheld throughout the year. So for those of you that are listening, I know it's not as easy to follow a form necessarily since I'm just speaking about it, but I will be putting a link to this form on the show notes. So just go to onmywaytowealth.com or whatever favorite podcasting platform you're listening to, go to episode 52, check out the resources section, because I will have a link to this particular form. And I'll also be putting a link to an article that was written on Business Insider. I'm part of the Business Insider Tax Advisory Board, and that's one of the things that we recently reviewed. So be sure to take a look at that article as well, because it goes into very good detail as far as the form, and you have a copy of it as well so that you can follow along. So the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 has some pretty big tax changes, and as a result, the IRS has to revise their W4 form. Some of you might have already gotten one of these from your employer, especially if you have gotten a new job. So let's get into it. So pretty simple. Section 1, everybody has to do steps 1 and steps 5. Step 1 is very simple. It's just your name, last name, social security, address, and your filing status. And that could be single or married filing separate, married filing jointly or qualifying widower, or of head of household. Just check the box, and that's it. And like I said earlier, if you're single and you don't have other jobs, et cetera, it's super easy. You could just jump to step 5, sign it, date it, hand it into your employer. You no longer need to worry about clicking exemptions, because that was taken away with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So that makes it a lot simpler to fill this form out. Now, the other optional steps are based on your situation. For example, step 2 is if you have more than one job at a time, or if you're married filing jointly and your spouse also works. You want to make sure that the correct amount of withholding is being taken out, because your employer does not know about your spouse employer. And remember that if you file a married filing joint return, both of your incomes, if you're married and filing a joint return, combined will then get taxed together at whatever tax bracket you're in. So sometimes I've seen the case where a married couple might not withhold enough taxes because one spouse is not having enough withholding, right? Or they're being taxed at a lower rate because they happen to make less money. So you want to make sure that you compensate for that, at least in one of those W-4 forms that either one of you submits to your employer. So this particular form on step 2, there's a section that says multiple jobs or spouse works. If that's you, you basically follow the worksheet in the back where you can basically match the amount of income. It's an income range that the higher wage earner makes, and then match it to the amount of income that the lower wage earner makes. And what it does is you arrive at an intersection where you have then a dollar amount that you would divide by the amount of pay periods that you get in order to then fill out in step 4, number 4C, you would enter extra withholding. And basically that's you letting your employer know, hey, in addition to the standard withholding, I would like to have X amount withheld. So to give you an example, if somebody does the math and when they look at the charts in the back, it turns out that the intersection between the higher wage earner and the lower wage earner is $7,000 and you get paid biweekly, you just divide the $7,000 by 26 pay periods. So you would get $269.23. And that's what you would tell your employer on the W-4 form on 4C to say, this is how much extra I would like to withhold. The reason we're going to do that is because if you don't do that, then come tax time next year, you would have had all that money under withheld, right? Meaning that you did not have it taken out and sent to the IRS. And then you run the risk of owing. And at that point, if you owe money and you weren't expecting to, and maybe let's say you didn't have the opportunity to pay it all when it's due, then you might run into a situation where you end up paying interest to the IRS. You might have to get on a payment plan. You might pay penalties if you don't pay it all in full by the end of the deadline on April 15th. So you want to make sure that you analyze this W-4. Now, the flip side to that is one of the examples I gave at the beginning is when people do not want to have too much withheld. So you also want to make sure that you do the calculation that way, because some people would rather not get a huge tax refund and they'd rather just be somewhat even or just get a smaller refund because they prefer to get most of their money in their paycheck. So I'll put a link also to the tax withholding calculator from the IRS, because you might be in that category where you want to just do the math and say, all right, I just want to make sure either way, whether you want to get a bigger refund. Some people do it that way too, where they consider it like a forced savings. Just have it come out of their paycheck and then they get a bigger refund at the end. And then they take that lump sum of money to pay certain things that are due annually. So it depends on your preference. You know, some people just look at it like, well, I don't want to give the IRS an interest-free loan all year long. I'd rather get my money ahead of time and then have the option to invest it or save it however they want. So whichever your preference is, at least you want to make that informed decision. So I'll be sure to put a link to the IRS tax withholding calculator as well. And obviously, if you have a tax preparer, it's recommended that you speak to them so that you know how to fill this form out exactly for your particular situation. Now, one thing that some people might be afraid regarding step 2 of this form is it says, oh, what if you had more than one job? You know, you might not want to tell your employer that you have 2 jobs, right? Now, you don't need to necessarily, you know, for privacy purposes on this form, you don't need to necessarily say, hey, I have a second job, Mr. or Mrs. Employer. You could just simply put the amount that you would like to have withheld extra. So when you look at 4A, it says other income. That one says not from jobs. So if you want taxes withheld for that reason, because you have other types of income, you could put it in there. And that could be interest, dividends, retirement income, etc. The whole multiple jobs thing, you don't have to tell your employer if you don't want to necessarily, right? So all you need to do is, I would say, do the calculation. And then when you come up with the amount that you want withheld extra, just simply put that on 4C. You don't have to come out and necessarily say, hey, I have another job, right? But you just want to make sure for your own purposes that you are having enough taxes withheld. Another reason why you would want to use this is, you know, especially now, I see a lot of clients, people that I talk to that have a side gig, you know, and that could be either driving for one of the ride shares or doing some deliveries, or they have a side business online, etc. most of the time when you're having that type of income, you do not have any taxes withheld from that money because you're dealing directly either with a company or an individual that's paying you, right? So if you drive for, say, a ride sharing company, you drive your car and you get paid directly from that company, there are no taxes withheld from that. So one way that you can make sure that you're paying enough taxes is sending quarterly estimates to the IRS if you have that type of second income, right? But life sometimes gets in the way and you might use the money or you just might not remember to make the estimated payment, which are due on April 15th, June 15th, September 15th, and then January 15th, as for the last quarter of the prior year. So one way to do that if you have that side income is to make estimates. Now, another cool thing you could do is if you have enough leeway in your regular job, what you can do if you know more or less how much money you'll be getting from the side job, you can simply just increase your withholding on your main job by adjusting your W-4 and on line 4C, have extra amount of money withheld. This way, you don't have to go through the process of sending estimates every quarter if you have that kind of leeway and bandwidth on your regular paycheck. So that's another cool strategy that you can use. That way you're like, all right, I already know I have X amount of money coming in on the side. I'm just going to increase my withholding on my W-4 to compensate for the taxes that would be due on that second income. So keep that in mind. That's another strategy. Now, moving on to step 3. If your total income will be $200,000 or less, or $400,000 or less if you marry filing jointly, it asks if you have any qualifying children under the age of 17, or if you have any other dependents, because there are some credits that are available to you, $2,000 for qualifying children, or $500 for qualifying dependents. So you just take the amount and multiply it by the amount of qualifying children. So for example, if you have 2 kids, you just multiply $2,000 times 2, and you just write the $4,000 in that step 3, right? And then you put the total on line 3. And then the final step that is optional that we talked about was step 4. And another reason that you could use this section is for people that itemize their deductions. So if you're not taking the standard deduction and you want to reduce your withholding, you can use the deductions worksheet on page 3 of the form and add up all your deductions, and you can put that amount in there. So this would be the case where someone does not want to have additional withholding and they want to actually get a little closer to having less deductions taken out based on their itemized deduction, having less withholding taken out based on their deduction. So you can do that calculation as well. And then 4C is just for the additional withholding, which you can do because for many reasons. One is if you have a second job, if your spouse has another job that they're not withholding enough from, if you have other types of income that are coming in like dividends, retirement income, et cetera, that you do not have any taxes withheld from, you can use this here as well. And then finally is just step 5, where you can sign, date, and then submit to your employer. So the form is a lot simpler. It's just one pager and then just has all the different worksheets in the back for you to make your own calculations. But know that you do not need to hand these worksheets to your employer. So if you were concerned for privacy, you don't want them to know you had a second job, things of that sort, or even all of your business, right? Like in terms of other income from spouses, whatever, you could just simply do the worksheets for your own calculations so that you know how much withholding you need to do, and then just transfer the amounts accordingly to those boxes in the front. And always be sure to consult with your tax advisor. And that's pretty much it. It's pretty simple. I'm going to put a link to the W-4 itself on the show notes, a link to the article from Business Insider, and a link to the IRS tax withholding calculator. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email, luis@onmywaytowealth.com. Check out episode 52 at onmywaytowealth.com or on your favorite podcasting platform. Be sure to share it. And if you have any questions, or if you have anyone that you'd like me to interview in the future and you'd like to make an introduction, always open to that. So thank you all for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you for listening to On My Way to Wealth. If you have any questions, please send me an email at luis@onmywaytowealth.com. The information provided here is for information and education purposes only. The opinions expressed herein are solely those of myself, unless otherwise specifically cited. Material presented is believed to be from reliable sources, and no representations are made by my firm or myself about other parties' information or accuracy or completeness. All information or ideas provided should be discussed in detail with a financial advisor, accountant, or legal counsel prior to implementation. Thank you.